go. Conversation 2 with Ken. Jess isn't here to spit all his personal weepy gold on all of us. What were we going to talk about? Were we going to talk about how to see? I mean, we could talk about a lot of things because Ken
didn't actually hit on a subject. Did you have something in mind, Ken?
Yeah.
Well, I like that suggestion of, I mean, probably as much as I love just kind of, in my metaphor would be just running to climb on the mountain, right? Just mapping out territory and just going. Some of the feedback I've gotten from people is that can be difficult to follow along with. So something that I'm trying to fill out is my toolkit to be able to make bridges to people where they are. So speaking about that, as I think maybe you had suggested, Luke, I think, just kind of, okay, how to build bridges in terms of language to people that that you've encountered, that you found helpful, and maybe talk about that.
Yeah, well, so where I would go, so Jess and Shari and I were talking earlier today about this, and I was trying to get out some of my thoughts, and where I tend to go with a lot of this is that I I'm similar to you, I suppose, in that I'm one of the most universal feedback things that I have when I'm talking to people about ideas is I have no idea what you're talking about. And a lot of that is because I'm a fairly I really make up all my own vocabulary because I'm not really just repeating ideas that I've read somewhere else. Like they're just my own ideas. And so and I tend to really believe to make it really the most succinct way that I can say it within classic languages, that I really believe that fundamentally the basis of reality is relationships. Like I believe in a relational ontology. And so I think ultimately, like this kind of idea that you can use language as a technique or a tool to communicate something fundamental, I think is a myth. I think you only really know something through love and communion. And so that's the summary of kind of what Jess and Shari and I were talking about this morning, is that essentially the idea of how to make someone see or how to communicate something is essentially, I mean, how I would distill that is to say, how do I make someone love me?
Sure.
Which is,
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Which is
to fall in love with being.
Yeah, which is tough. I mean, there's a great Viktor Frankl quote that I haven't committed to memory, but I just tell Michael Lady shared it with me, another friend from our little corner, and I always just say, Michael, what's that quote? And I like make him forward it to me, and I never commit it to memory. But it's essentially a great quote that says that, like, you can't understand something until you love it. I mean, that's kind of that's the deepest level of understanding. And ultimately, I think that's what dialogos is about. And so otherwise, I mean, you can get someone to say all the right shorthands, all the right words, all the right everything, but there will always be a relational, or I don't know, there's some kind of a lack, because that's never quite full communion, because the way that I always say it is like, you can be right and be wrong, or be wrong and be right. And ultimately what that means is like the language in and of itself isn't the exact words that you use in and of themselves. The labels are not the metric of love, I guess, or communion. So that's where I would go with it, but that probably was unintelligible to most anyone who would listen to this too. So
yeah, that's right. Like, so I totally agree with you. I love that way of putting it, right? That because it's in a way, almost to me, you kind of mapped out even what we mean to see there. Right? Because what we mean when we're saying move to the space where you're seeing in that metaphor is that you're in proper relationship to reality. That you're in the relationship where you're no longer stuck in these boxes, but exactly in the same space that you're saying that is okay, if somebody hasn't seen that, they don't know what you're saying.
Right. And we said this morning, like that your guys' last conversation was a great example of it, because when you're being like Jess, when he was being very personal in this completely vulnerable, transparent way, and I think we've all experienced this, when you have a conversation with anyone that's doing that, they're not talking about ideas. They're just talking about their, I don't know, for lack of a better word, testimony or their experience or what you can't argue with that. It's just like it's an undeniable reality. And when they're doing that in a really vulnerable way, the way that I describe it, it's like you're fully attuned. Like every aspect of your salience is pulled in. It's not just your intellect, it's your emotions, it's your heart, it's your body, like everything. You just are fully absorbed. There's an at-one-ment, and so then it's just like, so then what do? Is it just like you only talk about your story? Like you can't, because then if you talk about ideas, that seems like there's always there's a space between those things,
Words are beautiful, but it's the space behind them where we meet.
Yeah. And I mean, I found, when I got involved in this little corner of the internet, I spent a lot of time just telling stories, because I lived in a world of stories and I had no one to talk to. So I was basically, learning how to articulate, and all I could, I would say, yeah, but it's not like that. Here, let me tell you a story, and I was constantly doing that because it was all contained within the story, everything that I wanted to say. And of course, I knew that telling the story wasn't necessarily going to get my point across, because people would take little tidbits from the story that they liked and leave the rest or miss it completely, But that didn't really matter to me, because the story is like a ferment, right?
It's a parable, right?
Yeah, it's a ferment. Yeah. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And because it's so complex, because it involves all of, like what Luke was talking about, embodiment, and all that stuff, then it can work and it can reveal itself slowly. And that's what they do, right? That's what stories do. But I wanted to say something. Like yesterday, I'll give you a little glimpse into my personal life. I watched a video about Amber Heard's recent interview, but it was done by this panel of behavior analysts. Okay, and that really interests me. And one of the guys, his name is Chase Hughes. He's kind of like written the book on this stuff, and he's a neuroscientist and a forensic psychologist. So he explained a frame that I finally understood what a freaking frame is, because I've heard this terminology forever, and so the frame, he said, has 4 corners, and each corner of the frame has an order. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And the first one is expectation, the first corner. The second corner is perception. The third is belief, and the fourth is facts. And when you want to draw someone into your frame, you have to start with expectation, and then you go to perception, and then you go to belief, and then you go to facts. Okay, so there's a lot of things that are interesting to me about this, because expectation and perception are not things that you can see, right? You can't see what a person's expectations are. You don't know what those are, and you don't know what their perception is. You can see belief. Belief will manifest itself, right? That's the acting out what you believe.
Yeah.
And you can see or hear facts coming from the person's mouth. So he talks about it in the sense that if you skip the expectation and perception and jump to belief, you won't draw people into your frame. They'll actually refuse to come, because it's It's like that straight line example that I gave, right? So since you have horses, this will be good, because I do round pen work with my horses. You do round pen work? Okay, good. So when you put a green horse into a round pen, their expectation is immediately that you're going to kill them, okay? Because they're claustrophobic panicaholics, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and they're stuck in a round pen with you, right? And you are a predator. Your eyes are in the front of your face, and you move in straight lines, and so their expectation is that you're going to try to kill them. But what you actually do is you move them, and that radically changes their expectations, right? And when that happens, their perception of you changes. Now you're no longer a carnivore. Now you're no longer a predator, right? Now you're acting like the lead mare, and you're moving them, hither, thither, and yon, right? And so then they come to a belief in you, right? They believe something about you, and that belief becomes a fact to them. And that's joining up. That's what joining up is in the round pen. When they believe that you're the lead mare, they join up, right? And then the facts are proven in that wherever you go, they follow you. That's the fact, right? That the belief now is a fact. So I thought that was an interesting way to look at building bridges to people. Like, if you want people to understand something, you can't just lay out the facts. You have to start with their expectation, right? So what is their expectation of you? What do they think you're going to say? Because I think in most close personal relationships, you have some idea of what people expect you to say, right? And then when you radically alter their expectations, it's like, I used this example today. If you have a horse that steps all over you, it's usually because you let them step all over you. And they expect you to let them to step all over you. If that horse approaches you one day and steps on you and you thwack it in the chest hard, you've radically altered its expectations, right? And now its perception of you changes.
Yeah. So how useful is it, do you think, to have a really good understanding of what someone's expectations are of you before you start, right? Versus just
this is the thing, you
being
can't
who you are.
You honestly can't really know. So
Sure.
Like Luke was saying, there's a I don't know how you put that, Luke, today, but you were talking about the feeling of manipulating people, remember? Right. And I don't think that you can manipulate because you don't know what their perception and their expectations are, right?
Well, and you've already kind of broken the first rule, right? Like, you can't manipulate anybody into the truth.
Right. But even if you tried.
Right, exactly.
I don't even think you could.
So you don't think it's probably very worthwhile to spend any time considering what someone's expectations of whatever frame you're showing up with is?
What I think has to happen in order to radically change a person's expectations is authenticity.
And radical, we were talking earlier, and radical vulnerability in a sense where you, it's essentially whatever, I don't know. I think a lot of this is, I have this thing that I came up with, which became, I don't know, somewhat of a dumpster fire in this little corner of the internet, but I called a lot of aspects of theology piece of shit theology, which is kind of like a double entendre, which is essentially that it's the idea that man is, a lot of it is rooted in a certain conception of original sin, that man is like intrinsically bad. It's kind of this idea that people have around Jordan Peterson of like almost like a Calvinist anthropology, that man is bad. and irredeemable. But there's
That was
this,
a big one for me to work through.
yeah, but there's really something that's fundamental to that, which I think is most, and so like I've intellectually and in a lot of ways, and in the churches I attend, the people I interact with, I've moved away from that in like almost every realm. But like that shit is deeply rooted within me. And so, and I think the way that it most often manifests is in fear. And so I think something we often talk about is like trusting yourself, this inability to trust yourself because you're afraid of, with Vervaeke, we talk about like this fear of bullshitting, self-deception. I mean, there's all these fears that you can go into, but when you're engaging with someone, if you can, through your own act of just, I don't know, brazen, blind vulnerability, if you can completely disarm any fear that they would have, just be like, look, I'm not trying to convert you. I'm not trying to make you be on my team. I'm not trying to get you to do anything you don't want to do.
Yeah.
I want you to be the best, fullest version of you that you can possibly be. And I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
You know, if you
want you to
but
come home to
somehow
yourself.
through your conversation, if you can get there, I mean, what is that creates a space to free the person up to, I don't know, it's like psychoanalysis, to say what they really think.
Yeah.
You know, because like, what's the repercussion?
Yeah. Yeah. And really, I think what I've experienced in this area, and I try to practice this a lot. This is, I think, actually why I do medicine, is because I have the opportunity to engage with new people on a pretty consistent basis. And so I have the opportunity to just practice how I present myself.
Yeah.
And what I am able to do when I'm in a space that I'm not caught by something, I move into that space and I talk to the person behind the situation. I actually even like envision them behind their body almost, so that I'm able to move into the space where all the stuff that is associated with my life, all the content of my life and all the content of their life, I kind of almost like put it to the side a little bit and then try to talk to the person behind them. I kind of do that visually, and that seems to always create this kind of space.
Yeah, well, we were talking about this earlier, because to get personal for me, there are times I struggle with it. I'm trying to think of I was sharing with Shari and Jess that I don't know how to make it happen. I don't know what it is. Like what you're explaining right there, there's a ritual, or there's a practice, there's a thing that you're trying to do. You found a method to enable you to get to this place to do it. And a lot of times with people, the way that I describe it to Shari, and I don't know, I would love to hear Shari's thoughts on this, because Shari, she's hesitant to want to diagnose things or get into people's business, but I think she's actually really good at it and like pretty perceptive of things, but she's always pretty hesitant to give people advice. Because the way I was talking about it earlier is a lot of times in conversations, I can't start the ball rolling. And because we were talking about needing a mediator. Because even in therapy, sometimes when you need a mediator, I always talk about stuff with my mom or with my wife or whatever. And what having a mediator does, Shari, and you can elaborate on this, she was saying it gives you a space to be, I mean, how did you say it? To get beyond your fear of getting vulnerable or saying what you really think, because sometimes you can't even get there, because in these really close relationships, you're so wounded or scared because of this frequent conflict of whatever it is, that you just can't get to this spot. And so sometimes in conversations, like I feel stuck. And then if there's somebody else there, the way I described it was to get the ball rolling. It's just like, I can, once the ball's on the court, I can play. But like that initial pass, I am just.
But sometimes he gets dribbling, and he's so fast, everyone's like.
You know, what I think of when you're saying that is the idea of holding space. That was kind of the language that helped me build the metaphor.
Yes, that's a good thing. Like, this is the thing. To me, it's all about spaces. Everything is about the in between, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Thresholds. And what's interesting about thresholds is that you have to step in, right? Like, so when you're at the threshold of anything, there's always that trepidation, right? Because the stepping in through the door, through the frame, whatever it is, it's a commitment, right? And that's what arouses fear. Like we were talking, Jess mentioned that in the open space, when he talked about open spaces. So, you know, I kind of I jumped away ahead with the open spaces, but like all my livestock here, they're very careful about entering an open space for the first time. If it's a pasture they're used to, they're in and out of there like no problem. But if they're going into an open space for the very first time, they're very, very, very careful about it. Sometimes they won't even go, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you're in dialogos with people, you're basically creating a space, right? An open space, because you don't know what's going to happen in this dialogos, right?
Yeah.
And some people will just refuse to enter. And so, like, I personally, when I saw a suggestion for the conversation, I was like, yeah, I'm out. Because I don't think you should actually make people see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like, there's a real danger in trying to wake people up too early.
Well, it's conversionist to me, right?
Well, yeah.
It's assuming that what I'm seeing is what they need to see.
Right. There's an element of it that violates the first principle.
Yeah. You know, with my sheep, for example, if I go into a new pasture, if I'm trying to lead them in, they'll follow me anywhere, right? We get to the threshold of the new pasture, and I'll walk in there by myself, and they'll all stare at me, waiting for me to just be gobbled up by some giant, whatever. And that is how you get people to see it. You have to go there. Mm-hmm. That's the only way.
And then tell the story about it?
Well, you have to let them see you go. You have to let them see you go in there and see that nothing ate you, right? And you have to feel comfortable there. Like, I actually do this with my sheep. I'll go in, I'll call them, I'll try to coax them, and that's just like counterproductive. So then I just forget they're there, and I wander around and I look at things, and I pick up sticks, and I keep myself busy, and I look very relaxed, and all of a sudden they're all in. That's what they do, right? They follow me right in. As soon as they see the shepherd. As soon as they see me being comfortable and relaxed and safe, they're in. And they do it without my even noticing them.
So let me ask you about this, because I find that fairly convincing. And I've been thinking a similar kind of thing. So we've been talking about kind of interpersonal relationships so far, but we have this whole like cultural scale where, in a way there is this sense in which the words we speak, especially into a broader cultural space, create this whole thing that is this Tower of Babel of culture. And it seems like there's this whole corner of the internet is trying to rewrite, or not necessarily rewrite, but re-perspective and maybe reframe a lot of the aspects of the Tower of Babel where things have gone wrong and gotten rotten and are falling down. And so there's a way in which, or is there a way in which we are careful to pay attention when we are attempting to modify ideas that are running on the cultural mainframe versus having an interpersonal interaction where there's if I'm talking to a person individually, I'm opening space for them to become a person, in a sense, or become more of a person, right? I'm doing agape, ideally. And if, but in some sense, even what we're doing here in this conversation, we're like trying to build frames and I mean, I like the metaphor of coding, right? We're like coding aspects of, you know, this whole idea structure that kind of runs in the culture in an attempt to push it in a direction that hopefully is a little bit less towards the cliff, something like that.
So have you guys seen, I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen or read the book Fight Club, or like the TV show Mr. Robot?
I
Do you
haven't
ever
seen that one.
follow? Okay. Well, the main, I kind of relate to what you're talking about in those vibes. Is I'm kind of when it comes to like the scale level of it, what you were talking about, technological, well, this whole Babel thing. I have this whole thing of my own word I made up, technological Babel, this whole idea. Like that level of the kind of coding and think, like I want to burn that to the ground. Like I would love to just set arson to all of those corporate structures and just level them forever, because I don't think they work. I mean, I'm a really I'm a pretty radical personalist, and I don't know. I mean, I try to be open-minded about it, and I've had people push back on me about it. But like at the level of scale, I don't know how meaningful of conversation we can have. However, I do acknowledge. So to push back on that a little bit, I do acknowledge there is a collective component to this and to language that. I mean, there are cultural zeitgeist, you know, that happens, you know,
Yeah.
and that is a real meaningful thing. But I don't know the level to, I don't how to say this, like the attempt to control any of those things. Like you hear about big tech trying to like control that stuff through social media and through salience and like and get you to pay attention to certain things to control how you spend money, and like that whole capitalistic technocratic, like that thing to me is fundamentally antichrist. Like
Yeah.
I don't you're not going to build the kingdom of God with that ever.
Yeah, totally.
So I don't like, so then like in this little corner of the internet, then, you know, I don't think there's a corollary. And this, the way that I would illustrate it, and tell me if I'm totally going askance from where you were going with this, just redirect me and forget it. But like, we talk about this thing that Paul Vanderklay started, Estuary, which is like online community and trying to make it local and it's really about trying to build communities and relationships with people. And I've kind of always been on the team to the point where like people are like, yeah, Luke, we know your thing is that I don't think you can scale it, because I fundamentally believe that you can't know people at scale. It's like, it's a Dunbar number thing, you know, like how much, you can't really understand. It's back to the whole love thing. You can't really understand me until you love me. Like you might think you do, but like really, like John Mayer, you know, it says John Mayer lyric, like, who do you love, me or the thought of me? Like, do you love what you think I'm saying? Or is it really what I'm saying? Because there can be a loss in the words and your apprehension of those words. So I don't know, man, that corporate level, like a lot of what Vervaeke and Peugeot and Vanderklay talk about, like out of those three, I'm probably more aligned with Paul than any of those three, because I'm very leery of scale.
Yeah.
Always have.
Well, I think that's totally justified. I mean, there's a lot of levels I think that you brought up of scaling there. And there's some of them that I agree with you. I think like the corporate structure as such, and especially like the big tech, like basically anything that's creating a top-down scaling effect that's trying to manipulate feedback, that's trying to manipulate decision making, especially that's trying to manipulate attention, like I think terming that Antichrist is pretty accurate. But so two thoughts with that. One of them, with those kinds of things, one of them is like this burns down, right? This has to burn down because all things that are lies burn down. So it will burn down. The question is just how fast and how many people suffer in the meantime.
When you say this, what do you mean?
Like the corporate structure and big tech trying to control things.
Okay.
Just in the sense of like, I mean, we're already seeing it so much where, we're trying to, control gas prices and our poor decision making around financials for college. Like we're trying to control it with just arbitrary printing of money, and it's like, okay, that's just trash. But it will fall apart. But the point I'm trying to make is, one, I don't think a lot of us are trying to be intentional about where we're pushing this thing, other than just towards the good, whatever that means. So I don't want to, I probably, when I was speaking there, I misassigned agency in terms of what we're trying to do. But I very much get the critique of scaling as such. Like this is the biggest reason that I'm still not really a part of any church community. Because I recognize a lot of the value of it. And I can praise the different aspects of the church all day, but personally, there's a deep sense of concern around, the scaling of something like a universal church, because there's so many places for sin to get in. And if it gets in at a certain level of the hierarchy, man, the downstream effects are huge.
I mean, is that essentially just like what I would say is kind of the legitimate critique of like systemic corruption in institutions and in corporations and that sort of thing? Because I mean, I've always been a fundamental. I mean, I'm an anti-systems person. I mean, systems are for robots.
You'd get along with my brother very well.
Yeah, I don't like them, and part of it is, I don't know.
Anything that limits agency, right?
Yeah, I don't know, because I'm weird. Shari, I want to hear what you're thinking, because this gets into what we were talking about earlier, because it's almost like when you were describing your sheep in the field. I'm like, I'm a weird person, because I'm almost the opposite. And I was describing this earlier. Like, I don't like boundaries. I don't like the limits of freedom and opportunity and potential. Like, even that's why, like I was telling you earlier, even making decisions, like this is something I struggle with in my own family, with my wife or whatever. Like I start to like spiral and get into like, I become really neurotic when I have to make decisions, because I feel like I can't do it. It's just like hemming me in. I see too many, like I see all the potentials on every side, and like how this affects this person and that person and that person. And if I make a decision, it just like affects all that. And I just don't want to, and I just choose, I guess, like to passivity or something. So like, I'm the sheep that's just like you want me in I don't want to be in any container. Like, I just want to be in the light. I feel safest, like with nothing.
But the thing is, you are in a container. Like we talked about this last time, right? We're constrained by our bodies, and we're constrained by time. And so I love how Peterson talks about this, because we think we have all these choices. That's youth, right? Youth tells us you can do anything, you can choose anything. And we quickly learn that no, your choices get narrowed down very, very quickly. They get whittled down, right? But well, I'm going to be saying the same things that I always say here, but I'll say them anyway. So my question always is, why do you want to fix the thing? You talked about being pushed to the edge. And we talked about last time with Jess, how you have to come to the end, right? You have to go through the eye of the needle. That is being pushed to the edge. And that's not just true for individuals, because all of this stuff is fractal in nature. So it's true for everything, right? Needs to be pushed to the edge. That's what a baby in a womb does. The baby pushes right out to the edge, right? And then the body says, okay, it's time to be born. And that is what happens to us in the world. We fill out the space, and if we have the courage and humility to push ourselves to the edge, something new is always born. That's what happens.
Grace.
Exactly. And so I say, just let the lemmings go over the cliff. Let it happen. Because that's the bottom of the U-shaped journey that Jess and I talked about, right? And after that is the resurrection. And so personally, what I feel called to do in the world is to accompany people over the edge of the cliff and tell them that it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay.
So, yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. One of the things that I'm not sure that this isn't to push back on this. This is just maybe my perspective would be, I seem to find myself in a space that I can't account for quite by that metric, because I really haven't suffered very much. I've suffered internally, but it's not always, but it's mostly been my own choice. And then consequence of, the breadcrumbs, you might say, that others have left behind them. And so I'm very cognizant of the fact that I didn't discover really anything. I just was led by the words that other people left for me, and really didn't suffer that much. And by choosing to go and expand, I was able to not suffer, but I couldn't see to go and expand until someone called to me with words. So I think that's fantastic, but I think there's also this sense in which, we can, because I see what you're saying in terms of everything is a fractal, and everything maybe has to go through that eye of the needle and that U shape and all that stuff. But there's also this way in which humanity as such is the meeting point, right? Humanity as such is kind of the eye of the needle in terms of the fractal.
Let me just interrupt really quick, because when you said suffering is grace, I don't know if I entirely agree with that.
Yeah, I don't think that's a total statement, but yeah.
I don't really know what it means to you. So,
sure.
But what I don't think that going through the eye of the needle actually necessarily means that you're going to suffer.
Okay.
Right? I don't think that's, but you have to come to the end of your own resources. That's what I'm talking about.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
You have to come to a place of unknowing.
Yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah. Sorry, I misread you as I picked up as suffering there somewhere.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking right now of the parable of the rich young ruler. Okay. And what I find really fascinating about that parable is that when he comes to Jesus, he says, what must I do, right? What could I do to get, to be better, to fix things, right? To climb the mountain, to do, and Jesus said, you're doing just fine. That was his first response. Okay. And then he pressed him. And I think a lot of people skip over that first response. They don't notice it, right? Because they're so focused on the second one, when Jesus says, sell everything you have, right? And so Christians grab that, man, and they run with it. They're just like, I'm selling everything I have, It's just like, well, wait a minute. The first thing he said was, you're good. That's the first thing he said. And somebody pointed out to me that tradition teaches that was Barnabas, and that Barnabas actually did end up selling everything that he had, okay, and gave it all to the poor. And what that did for me with that story was it blew it into the cosmos, because what Jesus was saying to Barnabas, secondly, was his future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. He told Barnabas what he was going to do. And hang on. And what happened to Barnabas? He went away sad. Why? Because we can't fathom at a young age, rich, young ruler, okay? We can't fathom at a young age what we're going to be willing to do when we get down that road, that journey that we're taking, right? And that's why Jesus said, you're good, because it's the journey that he needed to make. So anyway, that's my interpretation of the rich young ruler.
I like it. So if it sounds like what you're kind of getting at overall here is, don't try to postulate a goal, just be there and love people and like have faith, really, right?
Well, that's why I like to point out that when God created the world, he said, let there be. And then he said, and it is good. Being is good. You know?
Yeah.
So.
Right. And you have to, the way that I've often said that, I know that we have kind of similar, like I saw you we're talking to David Taylor or whatever. Like,
oh yeah.
I used to interact with Seth on Twitter back on the day when I was on Twitter and read his book and stuff. And
oh, cool.
There's all these background things that we have, and you're talking about blue like jazz and stuff. But so I'm always plugging Rob Bell because I love Rob Bell, and I'm just not even going to lend any caveats that I normally do because I don't care.
No, that's fine.
One of the things that he often says that I really love, which is to Shari's point, is to being good, like that fundamental belief. I mean, it kind of ties back into POS theology, but how I've heard Rob talk about it is, do you believe fundamentally that, he says, universe or God or whatever you want to call it, is reality one of abundance or scarcity?
Yeah.
And Nate, to bring in our friend Nate, who had this brilliant point that I think from the parable of the loaves and the fishes that I've never thought about, but what a lot of the loaves and the fishes was about was like quality versus quantity and personhood. It's just like the amount of food here is irrelevant. Like I can make infinite food out of these fish, like that doesn't matter. Or even often I think of the holy men or yogis or saints or whatever, that they can like eat nothing. They're just out in the wilderness, like eating nothing for.
I was going to say, there's a lot of Eastern here. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think that that's to like the modernist scientific quantitative mind. Like that's insanity. They're just like, okay, you're stupid. Well, that's not reality. Well, that's the question though. What is reality? Mm-hmm. Is reality one of beneficence or of just like fear and scarcity and red in tooth and claw? And like what is the world we're living in? Where are you standing, as Peugeot would say?
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, and I think that you're not only your personal individual consciousness in that, but like also this gets into the corporate effect of it. I've often said that, and this is truly my belief, that I think in the kingdom of God, or the eschaton, or whatever you want to call it, nothing will change. But what will happen is we will all, our consciousness, it will be like a shift in consciousness where we all move from this vision of scarcity to one of abundance, and nothing will change, but in nothing changing,
everything will change. I actually see it very similar. I leave space for everything in terms of the present, or in terms of the past and the future and the present, right? So, but like that's probably the primary lens through which I look at the eschaton, just because I don't know, like I'm very much, I can make all kinds of interpretations about all kinds of things in the Bible, but I'm very much careful to always maintain a posture of there's more and it's probably different, and it's in terms of how it literally works out, I have no idea. But in terms of like a while ago, I started thinking like, what would it mean for Jesus to come back? And also, can I play a role in making that happen? Because if I can play a role in furthering the opportunity for that, whether that's just means in my life, like maybe the eschaton is just about my life, I don't know. But in framing it that way, how can I play a role and become an active participant in bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth? And that was huge for me.
You know, Origen says that whenever you have an insight, when you're reading scripture, or even just meditating on God, any kind of an insight, he calls that the second coming.
Mm. Yeah, the logos in a sense, yeah.
That's what he calls it.
Mm.
And the other thing I wanted to say was that about what Luke was talking about, this is why Jesus says to Paul, why are you kicking at the goads?
Mm.
Right? That's the point of that statement about being and being good. Okay. So Adam and Eve are tossed out into the thorns, the goads, right? And you're going to have to work around or with or under or over or however them, right? Kicking at them isn't going to get you anywhere, right? And I find that when you don't embrace being good, because essentially what you're doing when you do that is you're calling God good, right? Yeah. Because he's the one who gave you being, and yeah, it's just interesting to me that you know, people are like, well, how do I make this better? Well, how could you?
Right, Shari. Well, and don't you think all that kind of comes down to this?
You know,
this reminds me of the Meditations on the Tarot Justice chapter, because it's like all of that ultimately comes down to a judgment of judging something in its essence. That whole thing is like, how do I make this thing better? You don't know what better is.
You don't know.
Yeah.
How do you know this isn't better right now?
Yeah, exactly. Well, but maybe you don't, right? Like maybe it's actually your resistance to it that is the not better. That's always what it is.
Yeah, but you're only resisting something because you think it's good to do that, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so like you get caught up in this. That's why as soon as you try to, like, I think that we've had conversations about this, but I think that judgment is casting apart. It's diabolos, okay? Because that's what it does. It creates dualities, right? Good and bad, you know, black and white, night and day, you know, all that stuff, right? And in order to I don't know if I'll be able to say this properly. There has to be a maybe like a laissez-faire kind of way of living in the world, right? This is what we talk about, Jess and Luke and I and others. This is what Mary exemplifies, okay? When she says, let it be unto me, okay? So she doesn't judge. She doesn't go into the deliberative mode of choosing, right? God says, this is what I'm going to do with you. What do you think of that? And she says, okay, let it be. Let it be. And that means whatever, like whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's like getting on a roller coaster ride. Like seriously.
Yeah.
It is.
Man, this is beautiful. This conversation has been so helpful for me, actually, because I've been in this space where I move back and forth between the recognition that essentially, you know, everything is perfect exactly the way it is, and feeling a heavy burden because of maintaining a sense of a posture of compassion towards suffering, and having the issue of trying to stand somewhere in order to have compassion, right? Like, because that's the problem. I can have all the compassion as long as I'm not standing anywhere. But as soon as I try to stand somewhere, especially because I can see way too much, then it's like then it's too much and it overwhelms me. I spent like most of the day yesterday in this like really difficult space for no other reason than I was just feeling, I had patients who had all kinds of issues, and I got caught in that. Instead of being able to have compassion from them, from the space of, just allowing the compassion to be there instead of having the compassion.
Yeah. It's a being having thing, right? Like you were talking about before. And something came to my mind when you were talking about that. Anyway, I forgot.
But that's at least for me, this is the real.
Sorry, go ahead.
You're good. At least for me, this is the real. This is the real danger of being on this mountain, in a sense, is being able to see too much. Because, in the moments where I do get caught, I notice that, like, man, I can, if I'm trying to hold something together, I can see too much and I can go down too many pathways, and then I just like, it's easy to get stuck in your own head when you're in that space. And
I'm curious what, because you follow Vervaeke quite closely. I'm curious what you think about his desire to eradicate. It seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me he has this desire to eradicate one's propensity to be bullshitted. Do I have that wrong?
Maybe expand a little bit on what you mean by propensity to be bullshitted.
Well, he's trying to give, as far as I understand, and I haven't waded out too far into Vervaeke, okay? So that's why I'm saying, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
This is the Wisdom Project. The Wisdom Project is to protect people from bullshit, okay? Is that right?
I think he would define it differently, but
Okay.
Isn't it just self-deception?
Well, bullshit is self-deception, right?
Yeah.
That's
right.
The difference between, that's what he calls it. Like, I'm not trying to be vulgar or anything.
No, yeah. But I think, and I obviously I can't speak for him, but my perspective on his work would be that he would define wisdom. Oh man, gosh, more something more like one, getting to the space where you're able to truly wonder at being, and two, having tools to move back to that space and stay in that space if you get lost. So I think there's a sense in which, like, he's certainly trying to push against, or trying to arm against propensity to bullshit. But I don't know, I guess I'm not even sure the idea of like eradicating it. I'm not quite sure what that would mean in general. But
eradicating the like, just arming like you said, arming the person to guard against self-deception. But so, like, I've thought about that, and it's a noble idea, right? But if you look at the Bible, that's how it opens. It opens with the deception, right? and it's the deception that leads to the fall, right? The fall, being pushed to the edge, right? Into the thorns, all that stuff. And so, it's because of a choice. And the choice, as soon as the choice is made, the judgment, this is good, right? This is bad. Then you believe you're in possession of something. So there's this progression. That's how I see it, right? There's this progression. Going back to my example of expectation, perception, belief, and facts, how do you change the perception of deception? That's kind of my goal. Right?
So do you see it, I hope I'm not putting this on you, but one of the things it sounds like is you're saying that deception is in a way, at least for the personal journey, a gateway towards moving through to where you need to be.
Well, because you cannot judge. I don't believe we're good at it. Okay, we have opinions about things, and we make choices all the time. Okay,
Totally.
but we often pay for those choices, right?
Yeah.
Because we're
Yeah,
just
you can't actually delineate what's good and bad because you
and,
can't stand anywhere.
and sometimes what you think is good and seems good turns out to be really bad down the road. Like so.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we have this problem. We have to choose, but we really don't know what's good, right?
Yeah.
So what happens when we choose? We move in a direction. We move towards something, right? We feel we're in possession of it, right? It's ours, and then we head down a road. And so this is how I see things. I see them as a labyrinth. The labyrinth has a way in and a way out, right? And you move throughout this labyrinth, and you think you're making choices. Now, I'm not disputing free will. I think you have to have free will. Okay, that's complicated, but
Very complicated.
You think you're making choices, right? But you're always going to end up. There's only one way out, right?
There's only
that's
one
kind of
reality.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's kind of like the ultimate like oneness.
Right. And so what's the point then? That's the question. That's the next question. What's the point of all that? Well, it's to learn, it's to come to the end of yourself. It's to you can't know oneness at one moment until you have been divided. Right?
No, totally. Can I read you guys something?
Yes.
I think it's related to this, and I know we're getting close, but so I recently read, I'm part of this book club. I'm not really that literate. People think I am because I remember.
You hardly read, actually.
I know. I buy books and I read like the beginning chapters. I kind of can hardly read. I read A Clockwork Orange, which I didn't even, to be honest, this is how uneducated and just backwoods I am. I didn't even know it was a book. Like I thought it was a movie. So, but I read this for my book club. So I read all these guys are so much more well-read than me.
Great books, actually.
But this book, it's good. I mean, it's not a great book, but it's a good book. And I think there's a section, I won't get into the general ideas. There's this deviant juvenile, and he commits all these acts of violence, and all these things are going, and he eventually gets caught. He gets put into prison, and then there's this new program that's going to kind of train him through kind of a Pavlovian response mechanism through this like ritualistic training to be, like existentially and bodily revolted at violence and things to make him into a good person. And so there's all these, so like that's the ethical, philosophical, moral implications of this book. And there's a section where he's talking to this priest because he gets involved in religion while he's in jail before he starts this program. And I'm just going to read some of this. So he says, yeah, you are to be made into a good boy, 6655321, which is his number in prison. Never again will you have the desire to commit acts of violence or to offend in any way whatsoever against the state's peace. I hope you take all that in. I hope you are absolutely clear in your own mind about that, I said. Oh, it will be nice to be good, sir. But I had a real horror-show smack at that inside, brothers. And sorry, there's this whole vocabulary you have to learn for this book because it's written in like Nadsat, which is which I discovered is like this Russian, British like weird slang vocabulary. So he's just like, oh, I thought that was funny, essentially. And then the priest responds, and he's like, it may not be nice to be good, little 6655321. It may be horrible to be good. And when I say that to you, I realize how self-contradictory that sounds. I know I shall have many sleepless nights about this. What does God want? Does God want goodness or the choice of goodness? Is a man who chooses the bad perhaps in some way better than a man who has the good imposed upon him? Deep and hard questions, little 665-321. But what I want to say to you now is this. If any time in the future you look back at these times and remember me, the lowliest and humblest of God's servitudes, do not, I pray, think evil of me in your heart, thinking me in any way involved in what is to happen to you. And now, talking of praying, I realize sadly that there will be little point in praying for you. You are passing now to a region where you will be beyond the reach of the power of prayer. A terrible, terrible thing to consider. And yet, in a sense, in choosing to be deprived of the ability to make an ethical choice, you have, in a sense, really chosen the good. So I shall like to think. So God help us all, 665-321, I shall like to think. And then he began to cry.
Wow.
Jeez.
And like, there's this, that's like, to me, the most profound section of this book. And to me, like what it gets at and how it relates to what you're saying is, and I mean, I don't know how this hits you, Ken, but I truly believe, and part of this is like this verse that I'm just making into tautology, but like even Christ was made perfect by what he suffered. And so like, do you think you're going to escape suffering? And I truly believe that, in line kind of with what Shari was saying, I think suffering is what makes a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know exactly even how I would define him in my definition of what suffering is. Like,
Right.
is that a kicking against the goads? Is that a fighting against just what is?
I define suffering as just any resistance to what is.
Yeah. Suffering. I was going through this book with this buddy who's a local friend of mine, and it's this workbook. It's like a self-compassion workbook, which is this gets into the POS theology. It's like some of the hardest shit I've ever done, because like it has you go through these really simple ritualistic things of self-compassion, and I just find myself utterly incapable of doing them. I was like, there's no way. No, I can't do that. But they have an equation in there that's like suffering equals pain times resistance. Like that's their equation of like resisting pain.
Because, John Vervaeke said in one of his lectures on the Meaning Crisis series, I think I watched like 30 of them, and then I still haven't finished them.
The middle ones are tough.
Yeah, and he said suffering is the loss of agency, and to me that is the best description of
that's not like, does God want goodness or the choice of goodness?
Right.
Like, and I think you have to have suffering to have that. This is why this is the whole, like, Cal and I have talked about this, our friend Cal, but I believe it's not quite like Leibniz, but it's a plan Leibniz. I believe this is the best of all possible worlds, because this is the only possible world. This is the world.
Yeah.
Like, you can't, this is necessary. God couldn't have made a better world, because if he could have, he would have, because he's perfect. There isn't a better world. This is the best world. And so then therefore what is here is here. This is back to the whole like reality, being is good.
Mm-hmm.
If this is good, it has to be. And so then your agency is like, what are you teaching me here? What do I need to be doing? God is always speaking. What is my response to this? Because the suffering, that tension, that the fall, the differentiation, the pain, whatever, that is what makes you, that's the difference between a robot choosing the good and me choosing the good.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
God wants me to choose the good, not just to do the good. He wants me to want it.
Yep.
And I don't think you can get there. This is Shari and I's favorite verse, like, I don't think you can get there. I don't think you can know until you are fully known in that way. You'll never realize that until you walk it.
Yep.
Well, this gets to this example that I've given many times about how I was injured in a car accident, and I had 3 little kids, and my life was super busy. And then all of a sudden I was just, crippled up and in pain all the time. And I was mad at God because I was just like, I don't have time for this, like why? And then the verse, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice, came into my head, right? And I was like, whatever, like that's ridiculous. And it wouldn't go away. And I said, okay, fine. So I got in the car, I drove up to this forest. We were living in Switzerland. So I had to go find somewhere where there was no one who could hear me. and I went into this forest and I said, all right, fine, I'm here. I'm rejoicing. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all this pain. And then all of a sudden it started changing. Right. And I started crying. And then I started really rejoicing because I started realizing that everything is making me. Right. And that I would have never gone on that mountaintop and talked to God if I didn't have all that pain. So anyway,
That's
I guess
cool.
you have to go away.
I do need to go. Thank you. That was awesome. Hopefully we can talk again soon.
Yes, that'd be great.
It's a
I'd
good
love to.
close. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah. Nice
All
to
right.
meet you, Luke.
Yeah,
All
you
right.
as well.